All right, welcome to week of April 21st. Apologize for the day late. I ran off for the weekend holiday and forgot to bring my computer home, so I'm back in my office. So anyway, this week we're going to be talking about Southeast Asia, and again, I'm going to put both PowerPoints, as you've probably already noticed, one from the publisher with all the sort of their details and stats and charts and graphs and all that sort of stuff, and mine, which is more, I guess, things I'm interested in. So there's, as usual, some videos linked and embedded. There's websites and articles linked and embedded in the PowerPoint. So on the D2L interface, it's hard to access those things. Of course, if you open the actual PowerPoint, you can find those things. I'll reference some of those as well. So again, I'm talking through my PowerPoint slide here. So slide 2 is the map of the region. You can see we talked about the South China Sea a little bit last week. You can see it there, how it borders Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, Brunei is in there as well, and Singapore. And so that is causing a lot of the ruckus in that part of the world, as those nations also, and usually, China for thousands of years has been this so-called sort of big brother in the neighborhood, or the biggest dog on the block, however you want to phrase it. And those countries are pushing back against that. You can see there between Vietnam and Philippines a thing called the Spratly Islands. Those are legit, islands, and those have been controversial for a long time. They're right in the middle of Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, and then China you can see the difference. Again, next week we'll talk about law of the sea a little bit and territorial waters and all that. And so Spratlys, China sort of claims those. They don't really have a right to claim them under international law. They use what are called historical claims. So, again, there's a lot of pot stirring going up in there. And then I have a cold, so I apologize for my breathing in here. So the first one then we'll do with Vietnam, and we'll start, Vietnam, of course, is an ancient country, thousands of years old, pretty much a discrete people group in that area for those thousands of years. So kind of like the Han Chinese, relatively, I won't say homogenous, but a strong presence in that area for thousands of years, strong cultural cohesion. And so it was part of the sort of French colonialism. So if you ever study French history, that's Indochine, Indochina, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, all part of the sort of French Indochina aspect. And so up until France kept those colonies, well, they were occupied by the Japanese during World War II. When the war is over, you had this sort of weird, we just defeated these two powers that were conquering territory. I mean, on some level, the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese are colonial powers, right? They're looking for extra space for resources and for what are called living space, Lebensraum, in the Ukraine and Belarus and Belarusia and Russia and all of that. And so then when the war is over, you have the Brits, the Dutch, who have colonies in Malaysia and Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, and of course the Brits, and also the French say, well, can we have our colonies back, please? And so you had this sort of recolonization of places. Well, those people, regardless of how the Japanese treated them, and it wasn't very well, they wanted their independence. So in 1954, the French are kicked out of Vietnam in 1954. And then in the sort of post-World War II Cold War, which is the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, chess pieces around the world, there's way too much to talk about in a 20-minute video. There's a vacuum, if you will. And so Ho Chi Minh is the sort of, I guess, George Washington type figure. He's no George Washington, but he's the sort of founding father, the Mao, if you will, the Lenin of Vietnamese communists. He defeats the French, they defeat the French, and there's a vacuum, right? So they start to consolidate their power and their authority in the north. We set up a puppet government in the South that is sort of pro-U.S., anti-communist, which is not to say democratic, because they're not democratic at all. This is sort of part of the, if this is more of politics and less geography, we could talk about why you should have good governments in place and not bad governments in place. Suffice to say, it's pretty corrupt. And so in the early 60s, President Kennedy starts it, and then LBJ, after Kennedy's assassinated, starts to really kick in troops. And then in 1965, so that's the Vietnam War that we all know about, of course, from 1965 to 1973 is when the United States officially withdraws troops, and then 1975 is the end of the war. On slide 3 there, you see a little link, says North Winds in 1975. That is I believe it's BBC clip that sort of gives you the idea of the fall of Saigon. You see the entrance of Vietnam troops. There's some battle clips and sort of the famous image of the U.S. Helicopter leaving the U.S. Embassy with people hanging off of it, and then even landing people onto our aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. And even throwing helicopters off this is really just a tragic video in many ways. Invading in Cambodia in 1979. We'll talk about Cambodia in a little bit, but Vietnam also invades Cambodia in 1979 to sort of end the killing fields there. We'll talk more about that. And then in recent years, and there's some pictures here on slide 4, you see John McCain. If you remember John McCain, senator from Arizona, presidential candidate, I think in 2008 against President Obama during his first term, was famously a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War at a place called the Hanoi Hilton, which is in the upper right corner of slide 4 there. And was tortured and all that. So he visited Vietnam in the 1990s, and that sort of opened up the sort of a rapprochement with Vietnam. So I don't know how the trade stuff is going to work out with tariffs and all that, but from then until really just recently, and I would say even now, we have had a thawing and pretty good relationship with Vietnam. One, to sort of offset China. Vietnam's kind of resistant to Chinese influence in the region, and so are we, of course. Vietnam's still communist. But as you know, if you look at some of your goods that you buy at stores and online, you'll see many of them are made in Vietnam, textiles and food items and things like that. So there has been a thawing of relations, which is really amazing given the sort of just the tough nature of the Vietnam War experience. The map there on the top gives you an idea of the geography. So this is kind of where geography plays into. There's a whole subgenre of geography called military geography. Vietnam is this really thin snake-like country. So one of the problems that raises, it made a choke point. Narrow ground is easy to defend. And so a narrow spot. So it would be easy to stop North Vietnamese encroachment into the South. And so there are rules of war, right? Believe it or not. There are borders. You're not supposed to cross borders. So that brown strip there is a thing that was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which of course wasn't the official name of it. But the North would infiltrate into Laos and into Cambodia to sort of do an end around of American troops. And then, of course, eventually to stop that flow of terrorists, the Viet Cong, weapons and all that, we would send troops into Cambodia to Laos, and that's a violation of the laws of war. So, you can get into, well, he did it first, they did it first, so anyway, that raises a lot of the controversies about Vietnam. I'm not going to get into the good, bad, or indifferent on those things. But that's one way that geography tends to limit and, you can take advantage of those things. You can use them to your advantage, rather. You can also use them to the disadvantage of your enemy, which is, I guess, the same thing. And also the extensive coastline. So we dominated the coastline, but China is right there. So Russia and the Chinese Communist government, the Soviet Union, are able to use that overland routes to arm, Vietnamese troops and all that sort of stuff. So just a whole hot mess. Not even counting the foliage, the jungle, the rivers, and all of that. Just a very difficult war to fund and to fight. The second there, the Admiral Jeremiah Denton, fascinating clip there. If you open it, you'll have to open it PowerPoint, but that's a clip of him giving an interview. He's a prisoner of war, and he's if you see him blinking, you'll see him blinking, rather. He's blinking the word torture in Morse code. That's how we sort of first found out that the North Vietnamese were torturing American prisoners of war in their prisoner camps. Anyway, so just a fascinating sort of piece of history. And then there's a lot of buildings there, as one in the lower right there, the French colonial architecture. If you get into, especially Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi up in the north, there's a lot of that sort of legacy of French colonial architecture where they come in and build courthouses and opera houses and city halls, police stations, homes, churches. Most of the country is atheist, which is sort of a communist legacy, but there is a sort of persistent Catholicism there as well, which goes back to the French legacy. There's also, of course, some persistent Buddhism there, which predates the French colonial experience. But it's open. Like I said, my daughter went there last year for 2 months, stayed in a high-rise Airbnb in Ho Chi Minh City in the south, and did some work with college students and some other things. And had a good old time. And, they were monitored. I'm sure you're always monitored a little bit, especially if you're American in a communist country. But had a good time. It's a good place to visit. Good beaches, good water, good people, good experience. Anyway, so this is kind of, again, an example of the thawing of relationships. Even if it's sort of bitter, especially in the American, well, in their experience too. I mean, like a lot of these wars, we lost 58 or 59,000 troops. In the war, but their cost was over 1 million, and we want to talk about we'll talk about here in a second the sort of aftermath of that. Slide 5 is a picture there, and then really the aftermath too is sort of, again, from an American experience, I guess, is the so-called Vietnamese boat people. That's sort of the name that caught on because they were literally fleeing the country in boats. How bad is it to live in a communist country? You want to take off on the high seas in any piece of crap boat that you can find. And that was a huge experience. So in 1975, I'll cop to my age here, I was a first grader living in Arlington, Texas. And I clearly remember, excuse me, kids coming into, I lived in the Dallas area, which is in central Texas, but Houston, Harris County, it was a huge debarkation point for Vietnamese refugees. Living out here in California, so slide 7 kind of gives you some of those things. So Orange County, California, which is about 30 miles west of where I am now. There's a town called Garden Grove, which is about 10 miles south of Disneyland in Anaheim. It, at one point, I think it still has the largest concentration of Vietnamese Americans in the United States. And they, if you just look at the map, where do they come? Well, when they get off the boats, and those are pictures of some of the boats, so look how crowded they are. I mean, they are dangerously overcrowded. Whatever else you can say about our experience in Vietnam, we allowed a lot of these people to come in. They are refugees, right, in the original sense of that word. They're fleeing persecution for politics. They're the Vietnamese government, Ho Chi Minh had died before the end of the war. The communist government does what all communist governments does. It has to then take the young people away from the old people, educate them in the ways of Marxism, communism, and Maoism, and all those combinations thereof. And of course, you can't, I'm too old to learn new tricks. I'm the proverbial old dog. So you got to get rid of people like me, people that are older, people that are trained in other ways, that are Democrats, that are lawyers, that are professors, that are doctors, and all that kind of stuff. So that's re-education camps. So people flee in a mass exodus. The stat there, about 1 million plus people are killed by their own government. So you have this huge tragedy in Vietnam. You have the war, which kills 1.5 million Vietnamese at least, maybe more. Excuse me. And then after that, when the government takes over in May of 1975 and starts to do its thing, it kills another 1 million people at least, and that's an estimate. So records, as you might imagine, are hard to come by. And that comes from a book by a guy named R.J. Rummel, who I think has since passed on, but he was a professor, and he wrote this book called Death by Government, which sought to capture the death tolls of, not in war, so not war dead, but people killed by their own government. So if you think about the colonial experience, they're governing these places. So the French and the colonial Belgians are killing Congolese, so that's a death by government. You have the Soviet Union, Stalin killing 40 million people, Mao killing 83 million people. the Americans killing, I don't know, half a million Filipinos in the 1910s and aughts. The Turks killing Armenians in the World War, that sort of thing. So anyway, Death by Government, it's a pretty good book. It's an eye-opening book for sure. There's a map of modern Vietnam. So they renamed Saigon Ho Chi Minh City. So if you watch any Vietnam era war movies or Vietnam War era movies, there we go. You'll see Saigon. Well, they renamed it Ho Chi Minh City. It's still oftentimes called Saigon, but anyway, that's the new city. So that's slide 8. If you look in the middle there's a place called Da Nang. Da Nang was one of the major bases in the war. And up there is a town called Hue, H-U-E. There's a really good book called Hue 1968 by a guy named Mark Bowden, who wrote Black Hawk Down, if you've ever read that book or seen that movie. A really good book about the Marine doing encirclement of the city by the North Vietnamese Army and the defense of that city by the U.S. Marines. It's a pretty harrowing tale there. The next one here, Cambodia. Cambodia, sadly, is most known for, by it's an American perspective, for the so-called killing fields, the Khmer Rouge. Rouge means red in French. So Khmer is the dominant people group in the area. So sort of this communist takeover by a guy named Pol Pot and his followers. Excuse me. And so again, part of French Indochina historically. So when the French again leave, you have this vacuum of power that is in place. And, as we know in nature abhors a vacuum, as we like to say, and it's the same in politics. And so Pol Pot sort of fills that. And then the horror of his rule is from 1975 to like 1979, they set out to kill and do kill about a quarter of their population. So estimates are as high as 2 million out of 8 million. You might see some a little bit lower than that, but about 2 million seems to be the accepted number there. And again, they're younger. They're teenagers killing anyone older than them, basically, because again, old dogs, new tricks, and they're going to start over again. Sort of a reset. Year zero is a kind of a concept going all the way back to the French Revolution. And Cambodia again today. So they were so rabid and so bad in the Civil War, they were spilling over into Vietnamese territory, and the Vietnamese government, which also was communist and you'd think would be, friendly, were like, we've had enough of this, and they invaded Cambodia, deposed Pol Pot basically, and put an end to the killing fields in Cambodia, and then went back to their own place after a period of occupation. They weren't looking to occupy Cambodia, just sort of like stop spilling your war into our territory. From a cultural standpoint, 11 and 12, probably most well-known, their icon is Angkor Wat, which harkens back to an ancient or an older time. It's one of the world's largest and oldest monuments. I think it's still under repair. They are, besides the elements, people come and have always wanted to chip pieces off, write names, touch, climb, camp, all those kinds of things. So they are trying to restore, refresh, protect their main tourism site. Slide 13 gives you a sort of an overview. The first two links are part 1 and part 2 of a CNN piece from about 20 years ago that sort of set out to give you the good overview of the fall of Vietnam and how that leads to the Khmer Rouge and the killing fields. Aftermath, there the tribunals is about some of the how do you get justice for people who killed 2 million people, many of whom never brought to justice. Pol Pot dies of old age in his home, in his bed. Some of the other architects of the mass killings never saw justice either. But that's an article, I think, from the BBC about tribunals. And then the trauma link goes to an article about the sort of lingering post-traumatic stress that is endemic in the region. As I guess now it's been 40-something years, so a lot of people that were there the adults have passed on, but that younger generation is still both people that killed and had to kill, forced to kill, to become complicit, and those, of course, that saw their parents killed, etc. So there's a huge sort of hangover effect, if you will. So that deals with that's interesting article, nonetheless. Slide 15, Indonesia. Indonesia is I think I said before, is the largest Muslim country in the world. It's a former Dutch colony, Dutch East Indies. Probably, again, most famous from our perspective for a couple things. One, it's got the most volcanic activity in the world, which is Krakatoa. Krakatoa is this huge volcano in 1883 that is still the largest recorded explosion ever. And yes, that includes all the atomic bombs. 20 times Mount St. Helens refers to a volcano, which when I first made this part of that slide 20 years ago, everyone knew Mount St. Helens was. If you've ever been to Washington State, it's the largest volcanic explosion in the U.S. and U.S. history way back in 1980. Anyway, and then also the Boxing Day quake in 2004, which led to this huge tsunami, which killed over 100,000 people in Indonesia. It killed 300,000 people or more in Thailand, and others in Sri Lanka. And then the waves got all the way as far as Somalia and Kenya, all the way across the Indian Ocean. And 2004 is an interesting time because it's 4 years before smartphones. So there are some video clips. Today videos would be ubiquitous of it, but in 2004, there's some videos. The other thing it did is it led to, and there is a tsunami warning system in the Pacific. There are cables and sensors literally on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. And there were in 2004, if you think about Japan, the United States, Russia, these sort of highly developed technical countries, a tsunami warning system. So if there's a giant earthquake in the bottom of the Pacific, all of a sudden things go out to the countries on the coast. Say, hey, wait, there's a potential tsunami warning system. Well, they didn't have one in the Indian Ocean at the time. Probably more oversight than anything else. I mean, these countries are not third world countries. They have means and technological know-how to do it. I don't think it ever dawned on them for whatever reason. Anyway, so in Thailand, they this earthquake happens 2 or 3 hours before, and the waves are going like 500 miles an hour, and so they have no idea there's a tsunami coming to kill them. The hundreds, which explains a lot of deaths there as well. There's some before and after pictures. So 17 and 18, these are Google satellite images. So Banda Aceh was sort of like at the forefront of the quake. So 17 is a before and 18 is after. You can see it literally just wipes it clean. It goes straight over the top. Gliebrug, which is sort of the Dutch name, so kind of like a Dutch heritage there. Before and after. Again, Krakatoa is... There's a picture of 1883. That modern picture at the bottom is called Son of Krakatoa, which is awesome. It's kind of a nod to, it sounds like a Godzilla movie. It's coming back up. So the Krakatoa blew off that whole island. You can see the outline there on slide 21. It's making a comeback. So it is on watch. Of course, the difference between 1883 and 2025 is now there are monitors and scientists and things in place to at least anticipate as much as one can. So slide 22 there gives you aerial footage of the volcanic islands. 23 is a video clip of a tsunami that hit a part of Indonesia a few years ago. It's probably kind of, it went viral. A band was playing, and you can see the tsunami wave sort of hit through and come through this club in there as well. Slide 24 is Thailand, which again kind of gets the brunt of the quake, even though it hit the tsunami anyway, even though the quake hits Indonesia off the coast of Indonesia. And so Thailand is another interesting country. It was never really colonized by European power. I guess if it's kind of what's the song, the musical, The King and I. You ever seen The King and I? There's a British influence in there. There's French influence. But the Thai culture just never really succumbs to European influence totally. They are occupied by the Japanese during World War II as they sort of swept across Southeast Asia looking for oil and rubber and other materials. It's probably, for that reason, it's probably most known for a movie called The Bridge Over the River Kwai from the 1950s, which Japanese are running a POW camp, and they use British, Australian, American, and local slave labor to build a bridge. over that. It's human tourism is its big thing. Probably also known for human trafficking and the sex trade and drugs. Before there was a Colombian, not before there was a Colombia, but before there was a Colombian drug trade and Mexican narcos and things we sort of think now, there was the Golden Triangle back in the 70s where heroin and opioids, other opioids, and its own form of marijuana sort of start in that area and find their way into the United States, either through Europe, then coming through JFK Airport and all of that, and then so the original sort of international drug trade kind of starts in this region here, starting in Nepal and Thailand and other places. In human trafficking, it's also kind of known as a source country for that as well, and a destination country. And so Tier 2 is a designation the U.S. government gives countries who are trying to combat human trafficking. So Tier 1 are countries who put a ton of resources into it, past statutes, police resources, all that. Tier 2 are those who try and who would do more if they had more money, more resources. Thailand does not relish the drug trade and the sex trafficking trade, and it's put resources to it. And then Tier 3 countries just don't care or can't, for whatever reason. They're not able to or unwilling to. And then 26 and 27 are some photos of the tsunami hitting. You can kind of get an idea of the wave there, and those are 2 or 3 story hotel. And you can see the people there. They have no idea it's coming. They don't really know what it is per se. The area's recovered, for the most part. People still, vacation there. Koh Samui and the Phi Phi Islands, and also it's a great place to vacation in the fall, especially. And then the last one here I'll mention is the Strait of Malacca here, slide 29. Piracy is still a thing. Obviously, it's no longer really centered in Somalia, which is why I didn't really talk about it when we got to sub-Saharan Africa. It's still big here. If you see. So the South China Sea, part of the reason it's so important is it's like the freeway. I can't remember what the freeway is that goes through Minnesota. Is it the 90, Interstate 90? Is this freeway, right? So the South China Sea is a freeway. It's a deep ocean lane. Most of the traffic of the world, if you think about, the container ships are trucks, right? And so it's hard to see on this map here, but there's a ton of atolls and reefs and it's very, so you need the Deepwater Channel to get the boat there. And then the same with Indonesia. So the Strait of Malacca is down here on the lower left between Malaysia and that part of Sumatra on Indonesia there. And then it rounds Singapore. So that little strait right there is where all the world's shipping has to go. It can't go around. I mean, to go around Indonesia would cost thousands of gallons of fuel and thousands of man hours of labor, and it would increase the cost. So the straight shot is there. Well, pirates are like all other criminals. If you're going to rob people, you're going to hang out near ATMs, right? If you're going to murder people, you go where people are. I mean, it's like, if you're going to fish for salmon, you go where the salmon are. You go in the streams. So if you're gonna pirate big fat container ships with like 12 people on them, with no guns, then you're going to go where the ships are. So that's the Strait of Malacca is the OG site of modern piracy. Guys with fast boats and AK-47s and holding ships for ransom. And usually the gig is to, hold the ship, get the insurance company to pay, and then let the people go. So there's actually not always a lot of murder or anything like that. They don't even necessarily steal the ships so much as they just hold the ships. And what's hard to tell, again, from the maps is the number of tributaries and inlets and rivulets and all the sort of places you can hide, the pirates can hide. And then also because the boundary, and we'll mention this more next week, but the boundary between Malaysia and Sumatra, or Indonesia rather, is literally in the middle of the strait. So you could have a boat, if it's in the middle of the strait, where half the boat is in Malaysia and the other half is in Indonesia. You could enter the boat in one country and exit the boat on the other country. And it's not like if you're in a police department, you can just scream across the border necessarily. Those take agreements and all that. So countries have now gotten together better to combat these issues. But there's always someone who's on the take at a port or in a Coast Guard or a Navy or somewhere, or that's how these things tend to operate. So anyway, Interesting sidelight, I guess you could say, in terms of transnational organized crime. And so not everyone's transnational. There are independent operators in this region. And then Indonesia has the most land space of any country. It's got thousands of islands. And those have always been perfect places for criminal element to hang out. Terrorists, pirates, drug traffickers. I mean, a lot of those islands are unoccupied, uninhabited. They're little, they're hard to get to. It's really hard to police in that area. The Philippines are the same way. There's tons of islands that are there that are hard to sort of get at. Anyway, I see I've already gone too long than I intended to. So we got one more week. Next week will be chapters 12 and 13. I'll probably make two separate shorter videos so you're not watching one 30-minute chunk. And then after that will be the final exam, which will be similar to the exam, well, not the final exam, exam 4. So it won't be comprehensive. It'll be over the last chunk of material. And then we'll be done. So anyway, thank you very much. And I will talk to y'all later.